Recently, I mentioned a $28 trillion climate fund for governments to reroute capital for political ends, starving the real economy. This is a much broader problem, and today I want to talk about Europe. As frustrating as the EU is, my favorite thing about it is that it can serve as a warning to American voters. Last week, Danielle Lacaille published a great article summing up the European situation. In short, Europe has the exact same problems we do, but worse. It is a canary in our coal mine in the move from free markets to state-run domination of the economy by politicized trillion-dollar spending packages. They used to call these 5-year plans in the Soviet Union, but these are bigger and they come along every year or two in a frenzy to drain the treasury before the music stops. Going to the numbers, both the US and Europe are barely growing, even going by official numbers. The latest US GDP says 1.3% growth on the year. That's barely above population growth. Europe is much worse at negative 0.4%. Again, these are official numbers. So Europe's economy is basically twice as bad as the US. Meanwhile, inflation in Europe is much higher, running about 2 points higher than the US. And of course, in both countries, it's an open question how much the inflation numbers are cooked. So even taking those cooked numbers, Europe is doing much worse even than the US. Now, a decade ago, European politicians were talking about deregulation and structural reform to make their economies more competitive, which had long lagged the US in per capita income. Today, this has been replaced with the same thing we now do in the US, gigantic stimulus packages that fail to boost growth but tick all of the political boxes. Europe's most recent package flooded out $2 trillion to, quote, rebuild Europe over the next 6 years. Now, you might ask, rebuild from what? And the answer is that they like that word because it suggests tearing things down and rebuilding them, which is very profitable for the cronies involved, but of course is also very destructive. It is not the digging holes and filling them up of standard stimulus. This is actually tearing down useful things like coal plants or putting farmers out of business, as in Holland, and then slaughtering their farting cows. By the way, one might imagine how else you could spend, let's say, $2 trillion in Europe. You could, for example, cut taxes for small business to zero, or for nothing, you could just repeal red tape on small businesses or make it easier for them to hire employees. The problem is, beyond paying good money to tear useful things down, those stimulus packages also hurt the real economy by starving it of resources, called crowding out. To illustrate with the US example, during the supply chain crisis last year, there was a tremendous shortage of warehouses in Los Angeles because it was impossible to find workers in steel. Why was it impossible? Because the federal government was waving a gigantic checkbook around, hiring off those workers and even the steel to, say, rebuild racist overpasses. Remember, government has a planet-sized checkbook, courtesy of you, the taxpayer, and they will outbid anybody, including small businesses who are actually trying to grow the economy. Put it together, in the core conflict in society is between the people who use resources, both real and financial, to build a better tomorrow, and governments who steal those same resources to, at best, squander them, but more often to literally destroy what the rest of us have built. Where does it end? Sadly, I think the pendulum has a lot more to swing before voters wake up and end it. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.